Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Live with me, Ros Astengo, just coming up to 20 to 2. Good to have you with us. The Strait of Gibraltar is a gateway for drug trafficking between Europe and Africa. The 14-kilometre stretch of sea sees a never-ending procession of speedboats carrying tons of illegal drugs worth millions of pounds through Gibraltar waters. It's a dangerous activity for officers and traffickers too, which has seen several fatalities in the past couple of years. Well, joining me here today to talk about the issue is the Royal Gibraltar Police Commissioner, Police Commissioner Richard Ullger. Thank you very much for joining us. Police Commissioner, it does seem like an uphill struggle.
It is an uphill struggle, but quite honestly, we've got to be innovative, and we need to continue to fight this problem, and we work very closely with other law enforcement agencies to do so, because we can't certainly do this on our own.
Lots of drug seizures in the news practically on a daily basis, not just in Gibraltar but in Spain as well. I came across a really interesting quote actually from someone: drug crime is neither created nor destroyed, only transformed. And it seems like drug traffickers are becoming ever more creative in getting the drugs across the sea. Recently, you spoke about, when we were speaking just now, about a submarine.
Correct. Yes, drug traffickers will be innovative themselves, because they need to get their product to the suppliers, and to the suppliers to the traffickers, and so forth. So it's one endless chain. So yes, they become innovative, but we need to be better at how we police it and how we work on intelligence and information, share that amongst ourselves, and try to detect them. So much so that I think it was 2 weeks ago, the Policia Nacional had an excellent operation where they seized a submarine in Guadaranque. I'm not too sure of the details of the operation, but it just shows you the lengths that drug traffickers are taking to export drugs from particularly Northern Africa into mainland Europe through Spain. Okay,
well, let's talk about the high-speed chases that we see out at sea. I mean, how often are they? I mean, are they daily? Are they a couple of times a week? How often? It seems that we are reporting more and more of these on these high-speed chases.
It really depends, Ross, because it depends on the weather, of course. It depends on the supply. It depends on the organisation. But for example, if you've got a period of time where the weather has been pretty poor, and the vessels haven't been able to cross the Straits of Gibraltar to go into mainland Europe, there will be a lot of activity post that, and even pre that, before they know that the bad weather is going to hit. So it really depends on what the weather is doing, but also it depends on the supply of the drugs. So if we look at cannabis resin now, the cannabis resin is coming into a season where it is at its best, and so what the suppliers try to do is ensure that they ship the drugs across now, because it's the best shipment that they will have. But then, of course, so much is produced in the Northern Africa that they will store the drugs, and then it will become part and parcel of their market supply throughout the course of the year.
Just tell us about how you get your data, your analysis. Obviously, you look at trends. How much does that inform your policing out at sea?
It is a holistic approach in a number of areas, particularly intelligence, data. I can't share in detail of how we do it because it'll be giving the game away. But certainly what we do is work very, very closely with the Spanish police by sharing information and intelligence of activity that's happening. And we try and collaborate as best as we can. We mustn't forget that Gibraltar has very small waters around us, and very little comes into our waters. But when it does, we need to be in a position to be able to fight it, track it, and try and seize it and arrest individuals.
How many drugs has the Royal Gibraltar Police seized in terms of weight and value over the past few months? Do you have a figure for us?
I do. So if we look at what's happened this year, I would really be reporting on our policing year, which is usually from end of March to the beginning of April every year. But if I was to give you what's a snapshot of what's happened between January, February, March this year, we've seized over 2 tons of cannabis resin, but we have also been party to a lot of seizures that the Spanish Guardia Civil have in joint operations. On one occasion, on one night, between the both of us, we seized 2.5 tons of cannabis resin, which was an excellent a piece of collaborative work that we did together, working in partnership, and it's the best way to be able to fight this horrible scourge that exists.
Okay, it's actually a good point then to talk about that collaboration with your counterparts over the frontier. How closely and how often do you work together?
We work very closely on a daily basis. It is important that we do work together. Obviously, there are issues at times, but on most occasions, we are sharing that intelligence and information to ensure that we can, whatever way that we can try and either or arrest individuals and detect the offence.
La Linea is a hotspot for drug
It
trafficking. Can I just ask your opinion on the Netflix series Shadow of Narco? I think it's called. What did you? I mean, it's quite for an onlooker. It was quite scary to see the danger that these police officers put themselves in and what they have to deal with. Can I just get your opinion on that?
It is a very serious problem in La Linea, but it's also serious all along the coast of the Costa del Sol and on the Costa de Luz as well. We're talking about individuals, large amounts of money, possibilities of going into prison for extended periods of time. So they will go to their utmost to try and avoid detection. And if that means violence, including violence as well. We're very, very fortunate here in Gibraltar that, first and foremost, we have a very good judicial system. And I have a lot of faith in the police, in the Royal Gibraltar Police, particularly together with the Gibraltar Defence Police and HM Customs, who we also work very closely with to protect Gibraltar and keep Gibraltar safe. And if we look at, for example, violence that might be happening, violence that was happening in this film, in these series, we try and ensure that doesn't happen in Gibraltar. And if it does happen, we try and nip it in the bud as soon as we can.
Let me just ask you, there have been some very high-profile arrests in La Linea. The leader of the Castanya drug cartel was arrested recently as well. I think some other gangs, there's quite a number of gangs in La Linea, and the police are obviously trying to smash those gangs. Has that had any effect at all? I mean, have you seen any effect, any improvement?
Organised crimes will not recognise barriers and they won't recognise frontiers. So organised crime groups will work in and out of Gibraltar as they do in Spain and Portugal, Morocco and so forth. So what we need to be very alive to is the fact that they are moving in and out of Gibraltar, and we need to be able to monitor their movements and arrest them if we have to. We've done so on a number of occasions where we've extradited people, Spanish nationals, on European arrest warrants, and we've had some very, very successful results in that regard.
You mentioned a moment ago over 2 tons of cannabis resin seized. Can you just give me an idea what the market value of that is?
So if we look at the market value for the cannabis resin for those 2 tons, we're talking about £6 million worth of drugs, which is significant. If we look at what we've seized totally in Gibraltar over those 3 months, we had a very good drug seizure of cocaine, which was 25 kilos. So if we look at the total market value for this year, already is £8.5 million worth of drugs, which is big, which is big money.
Huge, yeah. Okay, so you analyse trends and you look at the data. Has there been an increase, would you say? I mean, I don't know how these figures compare with this time last year. And also, has the pandemic affected the trade in any way?
The pandemic has affected the trade. We've been very fortunate on this occasion where during the pandemic, and no one wished for a pandemic to hit Gibraltar, the world, but what the pandemic gave us was a tool known as the curfew, which restricted people's liberties. Now, I think it's very important that the people listening to me don't think that I want the curfew to take place. Neither did the Chief Minister when he announced it, because he very much said it was very much against his grain. We don't want a curfew. We don't want to restrict people's liberties. It goes against freedom of movement of people. But what it has done has allowed us to have that extra tool to be able to monitor people who are moving around Gibraltar and involved in illegal activity. So a lot of the enforcement that we have done over the past few months, where we've had a curfew, has been because individuals have been involved in criminal activity. It has been an excellent tool for us. But equally, I'm conscious of the fact that we're restricting people's liberties, and we don't want that happening. So we need to look at other measures. But if you ask me whether during the pandemic we've had a bit of an impact, I think we can say that it has had an impact on drug trafficking.
Right. I mean, drugs is a huge subject, and at a sort of micro level, it does affect individuals in the street. That will leave for another subject. We'll focus on the bigger picture at the moment today. But there is a local market for assisting these drug traffickers, isn't there? Particularly with the supply of fuel. Correct.
So you've got the supplying of fuel, which has been a new trend recently, but there has also been the organised crime groups involved in the shipment and drug trafficking from North Africa into Spain for mainland Europe. But yes, we've seen a new trend, and what we have seen is local individuals involved in providing what we call marine petrol stations. So what you will have vessels coming into Gibraltar that are supplied with vast amounts of fuel that are then taken out into a spot in the middle of the Mediterranean where they act as a floating petrol station. So when the drug boat crosses from North Africa into the Mediterranean, they have a pickup point to pick up that fuel, refuel, and then carry on their journey into southern Spain to be able to carry out their drug activity. And what that does, it allows them to carry less fuel and more drugs.
And that fuel is gotten from our petrol stations here.
Obviously, it has come from our petrol stations because it is in Gibraltar, and we strongly suspect their modus operandi of the way they obtain the fuel, simply because we have a very good working relationship with the fuel suppliers here in Gibraltar, and they work in partnership together with us to prevent these individuals purchasing the fuel. We must remember here that, and we're very, very grateful to the public when we came out pleading to the public to be our eyes and our ears, because it is very, very dangerous. Because when you have a vehicle carrying so much fuel to supply a vessel, that vehicle can be involved in an accident, and it could be literally a bomb, a massive bomb, which could kill loads of people. So there's a safety element of it. And then there's the other element, which is the fact that they are involved in the drug trafficking business. So I'm very, very grateful to Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar of how quickly they reacted to implementing legislation to support us. And this was literally a conversation between the Minister of Justice, the Chief Minister, literally over a weekend, where we discussed
Because it did seem to be escalating. Is that what that prompted this conversation?
Correct. It was escalating. We'd had a number of detections. We'd arrested a number of individuals, and there was an individual that was involved in a traffic accident, which could have resulted in a catastrophe. So what we did is we discussed the issues. It was so serious that the Chief Minister, the Minister of Justice, and Sacramento teamed up together to implement this legislation, which came in very, very quickly. In actual fact, we were praised by the Spanish authorities because of how quickly we reacted to it, as we've done in other pieces of legislation too.
Can you give us the main thrust of this amendment to the Petroleum Act?
So what it does, essentially, it restricts people from carrying excess amount of fuel in their vehicles, and also it prevents people storing a quantity of fuel in garages, in stores, in houses. It restricts them, and the penalties are significant. So individuals are now saying to themselves, is it worth doing what we're risking? And thankfully, we haven't had any detections since the legislation was implemented. So extremely grateful to.
So you think that it's had an effect already?
Well, of course. What the Royal Gibraltar Police and as other law enforcement agencies need is those tools to be able to fight crime. And if we are provided those tools, it helps us. And this was an example of that case.
Could you give us, I'm looking at an article here that GBC reported on 1,500 litres of marine fuel that was seized in January. Can you give us an overview of how much fuel the RGP, I don't know if you've got that figure on you, how much fuel the RGP has seized locally recently?
Yes, sure. So we've seized so far this year 5,500 litres of fuel. I can't go into detail what happened with the cases and where the cases currently are because they are sub judice. But what we need to, what individuals who are involved in this illicit activity is that they will be facing the sanctions with regards to, or the investigations with regards to being in possession of petroleum which they shouldn't be in possession of, and also involved in drug trafficking. So there is an element of more seriousness. If we can link up the supply of fuel to drug trafficking, we will do that, and we will take them to court on those grounds.
Okay, Commissioner, it's a very, very dangerous business, very dangerous for the traffickers, but also for the officers who are involved in intercepting, most often at night, very little light, very high speed. And tragically, it did result in 2 fatalities last year. And we know that there is an ongoing investigation being carried out by the Met Police. 6 officers visited the Rock last year. We haven't had any sort of update at all. Is there anything you can tell us today?
Sure, I can. So I can confirm that the Metropolitan Police Professional Standards team came to Gibraltar and undertook an investigation on behalf of the Royal Gibraltar Police. Subsequent to that investigation and in liaison with the Director of Public Prosecutions, they have come to the conclusion that there are no grounds to take this investigation into a criminal investigation. So what we currently have is that the investigation has now turned from one of being a criminal investigation to that of being a coroner's case, and now the coroner is the authority that has the case
Well, that is incredible news, I think, for the RGP, for the country, for the officers involved. How has Spain reacted to this? I mean, do they accept the results of this investigation?
We've had no contact in that regard from the Spanish authorities in relation to the case. This is a process that at the moment the Royal Gibraltar Police is undertaking together with the Director of Public Prosecutions and now obviously the coroner. So the matter currently sits in the court, in the coroner's court.
Okay, let me just ask you, because we are running out of time, how are the officers doing? Because the Chief Minister said in Parliament last year that they had been impacted quite severely by what had happened. They were receiving some mental health support. Can you give us an update on how they're doing?
I'll just go to very quickly at the opening of your question where we talk about the chases that our officers involved. I want people to realise that chasing drug traffickers at sea is a very, very dangerous business. It's a very volatile business, and our officers constantly put their lives at risk, constantly. And I admire them and I thank them, and I'm very grateful for all the hard work they do to keep Gibraltar safe and try to get the drugs off our streets. It's a very dangerous business. It really is, and I can't show my appreciation more for them. The officers that were involved in the incident, I met them a few weeks ago together with our federation, who are doing an excellent job in mentoring them. They're not in a good place, no. And I won't talk too much about it because it's unfair to do so. But you can imagine the impact that this has had on their lives. It has had a massive impact, and we're cognizant of that, and we need to be able to be there for them. And
no doubt it's had an effect on colleagues that they work with as well, who've also been affected by this. And how have you been able to move forward?
So, yeah, that's a very good question. So it is part and parcel of improving our service delivery. We've looked at how we do business in marine activity. We've implemented policies. We've improved trainings. We are looking at giving them better tools. It's all about bettering the service that we provide out at sea, not only to our officers, but obviously providing a safe environment when we're involved in fast, hot pursuits.
Police Commissioner Richard Ullger, thank you very much for coming in. I'm sure we could speak a lot more, and I know that you will be back on the programme in the months to come. Thank you very much for joining me.